Do subscribe to Ekeeda channel and press bell icon to get updates about latest engineering, HSC and IIT JEE main and advanced videos.
Hello friends, now we are going to talk about the difference between isothermal process and adiabatic process. So what are the key difference between these two processes? Let us talk about it. So this is now we are going to talk about the difference between isothermal and adiabatic process. So starting with the first one. So it states that the temperature of the system remains constant in isothermal process, because isothermal process is itself it indicates that the temperature should be remains unchanged throughout the process or throughout the transformation. So in that case, in isothermal process, the temperature remains constant. While in that case of adiabatic process, the temperature of the system changes. So this, how can the in adiabatic process, even though it won't exchange heat with the surrounding, the temperature changes. So this is the thing that I am going to talk about. Suppose if I consider a system in which suppose a reaction, or suppose if reactants are being kept, and they are and because since it is an adiabatic system, or since it is performing adiabatic process, isolated with the surrounding, or it can't exchange heat with the surrounding. So it can't exchange heat with the surrounding. So what will happen is, suppose if the reaction is an exothermic reaction. यार itching बहुत हो रहा है यार. Suppose if the reaction is an exothermic reaction. So what will happen is, if it is an exothermic reaction, then the temperature of that system will increase, but that won't lead to exchange of the heat with the surrounding. And suppose in another case, I've considered a system which is basically showing an adiabatic process, and in that the reactants are being reacted, and what happens is, it is an endothermic process. So what will happen? The heat will not be exchanged with the surrounding, because now in that process what will happen is the temperature will now decrease. So in that manner the surrounding heat will not be exchanged with the system. So that kind of process in which the temperature changes, but yes, the heat cannot be exchanged with the surrounding, that kind of process is known as adiabatic process. So this is where I got a chance to differentiate between these 2 points. So now talking about the next one, that is, the system can exchange heat with the surrounding. Yes, that is obvious, because in isothermal process what happens is, we could exchange heat with the system and the surrounding, but the thing that should be maintained is the temperature should remain constant for the system. So in that case the temperature won't be changing, and for that case heat can enter to the system as well as the heat can exit from the system to the surrounding, but the temperature, there will be no exchange of there will be no change in temperature that we will observe in an isothermal process. So talking about in adiabatic process, what will happen is, the system cannot exchange heat with the surrounding. So isothermal process will have something which will exchange heat, but in adiabatic process they won't exchange heat with the surrounding or the system. So now talking about the few more points which will differentiate between these two, that is isothermal and adiabatic process. Yes, this is the thing, that is, open or closed system is required for the process. So to maintain this process, or to maintain the isothermal process, the thing that we should maintain or we should consider is open system or closed system. And why? Because as you know that in open system, the matter as well as the energy can be exchanged from the system to the surrounding, or surrounding to the system, that can be exchanged. So during this exchange what happens is, the energy in the form of heat, even they can be exchanged, as well as the temperature will remain constant. Throughout that case the temperature would remain constant when you are talking about an isothermal process. But when you are talking about adiabatic process, so because it is an isolated system is required for this process, because isolated system is the one a system in which neither energy or neither matter can be exchanged with the surrounding. So in this process, because it is being isolated, it won't exchange the energy in the form of heat with the surrounding, and hence it is said to be an adiabatic process. So these are the two differences. And talking about the next one, that is, in this case delta U will be 0, and Q is equals to minus W. So what is this actually? So delta U is basically the internal energy. So the internal energy is being occupied with the heat as well as the work done by the system. So delta U has a formula of delta U is equals to Q plus W. So in this case, since delta U is equals to 0, so Q will be minus W. So this clearly indicates that suppose in an isothermal process, the amount of heat it will be utilized to do the particular work. Might be that for being an expansion for a gas or any kind of work, but yes, the heat that will provide to the system, that will be occupied in doing the work. While when we are talking about an isolated system, because as you know, because there is nothing relation with the heat, or you can't exchange heat with the surrounding, or they won't have any kind of exchange, so the Q will be 0, and as we know the formula delta U is equals to Q plus W. So therefore, since Q is equals to 0, the heat exchange is 0, so delta U is equals to W. This clearly indicates that to obtain a work, we don't have to provide heat, but in this case we could have provided heat, because in an isothermal process, so as to perform work. But what happens in adiabatic process is the internal energy that it has, or the change in internal energy in an adiabatic process that it has, that will give us the work. So these are the two key differences. And now talking about the next, that is the delta H will be 0 according to the definition of in isothermal process we have read that the change in enthalpy will be 0 in this case, while in case of the adiabatic process it won't be 0, it will be high or it will be less. Now talking about the last one, that is yes, the compression takes place by losing heat to the surrounding. If in an isothermal process, if it loses heat to the surrounding, so what will happen? The compression will take place. So this is only followed when the process is showing isothermal process. So when we are talking about the adiabatic process, that is compression takes place by adding heat into the internal energy of the system. So by adding heat to the internal energy of the system, and as you know that in adiabatic process heat cannot be exchanged, but at anyhow, suppose if we have if we have added heat to the internal energy of the system, then the compression will take place. So these were the few differences between the adiabatic process and the isothermal process. And so thank you friends for watching this video. I hope you have understood this video very clearly, and share this video with your friends, and yes, don't forget to subscribe Ekeeda channel. Thank you so much.